Good afternoon. We've been thinking about interconnectedness, which again is a theme that the Holy Father uses all the time in the encyclical. And I showed you, or tried to show you, where in the second creation narrative that we find in Genesis, we see the very language talks about relationship, interconnectedness. I want to take another passage from Exodus, and this is the passage of the making of the covenant after the flood. Covenant is a very, very important theme for our theology. We use it all the time. It really comes from an ancient Hittite culture. Covenant is the notion of covenant, the notion of covenant Israel borrowed from the Hittites, a nation further north. It was a legal contract. There were different kinds of covenants. There were covenants between equals. And we see there's a passage in Genesis 38 where two human beings enter into covenant. And one of them says, "May God be between you and me when we're separated from each other." It's a paraphrase of it, but they're equal of each other. But most of the covenants, particularly the ones that we would be concerned about as theology, are always covenants between God and human beings. So in the ancient world, they did have covenants between their kings and the subjects. But remember, in the ancient world, the kings were often thought to be divine. So there was very little difference between those covenants, between a king and subject, between God and the people. Those covenants are always initiated by the superior. Always initiated by God. Human beings do not decide to enter into covenant with God. That is presumption. It is God who decides to enter into covenant with human beings. And this story is the first time that word covenant appears. We're very aware of the covenant that God entered into with Abraham. All right? I enter into a covenant with you and your sons, which means generational. There's a covenant between God and the people through Moses, something else too. The text or our translation may say that the covenant was made with Abraham or with Moses, but it's always with people, plural. It may be made through someone else, but it's always with people. And I think that's very important for us, particularly we who are citizens of the Western world, where individualism is so important. We do not have the same sense of community as many other cultures do. Many of you have ministered outside of the dominant culture, and you know that Latinos and Native Americans and African Americans as well, but not as much because their culture has been destroyed by racism, by slavery, I should say. But many of those other cultures, they are much more societal or communal focused than we are. And I'm not saying that we should be more or less. That's not the point. It's just that consequently, we may not really appreciate the depth of what the scriptures are saying about covenant because it's not our experience. But it's always for the whole people. And if you look carefully at the text, we will see that. So what we have is God enters into covenant with the whole people, and it is a legal covenant. And partners in the covenant always know what they're getting into. Always. All right? And there was a formula. And they knew what they were getting into, which means they took on responsibilities. And the seriousness was, depending upon what the aspects or the specifics of the covenant, the seriousness can be seen in breaking a covenant. You jeopardize your life. It's very, very serious business. So this is in Genesis chapter 9. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, you'll recognize the language immediately. This is after the flood. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. That should immediately take you back to the Genesis 1 creation narrative, which means that the storyteller wants us to think it's a new beginning now, after the flood. Fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the air and everything that creeps on the ground. Now I'm going to jump down to verse 8. God said to Noah and to his sons with him, as for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you. It's not finished. And with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. The covenant was not made just with Noah. The covenant was not made just with human beings. Our religious tradition says that God is in a legal covenant with the rest of the natural world as well. Today, we probably would say with the natural world because we are part of it. We are included in that. I established my covenant with you. Now notice, this is what God is promising in this covenant. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. And never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. That has got to be a hard sentence for people who are living in Nashville, Tennessee. Think of all of the hurricanes that we have heard of that bring floods with them. We just had Henri up in the Northeast. What kind of a promise is this? Or what kind of a God makes a promise like that and doesn't seem to keep it? Hasn't that ever bothered you? That so many of the promises that we read about and we hear preached about don't seem to come to pass. Or doesn't that bother you? In a certain sense, it should. Because we should question either what kind of a God do we say we worship, or what does that text mean? Why is that in there? Now, if the ancient Israelites or the ancestors of the ancient Israelites came from Mesopotamia, which we know, Mesopotamia, of course, is Iraq. Everybody knows that map now. But we know that that's where Abraham came from, or Abram in those days. And Mesopotamia simply means land between the rivers. And when the rivers come together, sometimes they overflow. I spent 4 years in St. Louis, Missouri, where the Mississippi meets the Missouri River. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of the ark, or the arch, not the ark. It's ark in the book, arch. And the arch is on a hill. And I have seen that water almost to the top of the hill. And this is in the 20th century when we've got tremendous technological ability and we cannot control unruly water. They certainly could not control unruly water in Tennessee or in New Orleans because of Katrina. I say that because the Israelites must have known that there were always floods. So why do they put that in there? Or what can we do with it, having it in there? God has made a promise. But let's step back just a moment and understand that something throughout the scriptures, unruly water is a very strong tradition in the scriptures. And that takes us all the way back to Genesis 1. Because the Genesis 1 creation narrative is Israel's reinterpretation of a much earlier Mesopotamian, most likely, myth of creation. Myth simply means story. It doesn't mean it's not true. It simply is not historically accurate. So it takes us back to that time, and it's a reinterpretation. And the ancient myth was that creation was the result of the cleaning up after a cosmic battle. The ancients believed that the gods were not always in a good relationship with each other. Forget about the gods being in a bad relationship with human beings, not with each other. And the story is that the major god was threatened by a demon god in the form of a dragon, Tiamat. All right? And there was a cosmic battle. And the major gods were old gods. And so they asked a young god, dress up like a warrior and combat Tiamat, who happened to be a female deity. It's a wonderful story, and it makes perfect sense in history if you understand the details of the story. So this young god, Marduk, said, just give me the winds. That's all I need for armament. Just give me the winds. So Tiamat comes up to this. It sort of looks like a David and Goliath story. Tiamat stands up against this monster who opens her mouth to swallow him. And he charges forward, or has the winds charge forward and blow into her and blow her up. And then he takes his sword and cuts her in half like a shellfish. And with the top part of her carcass, this warrior god, who is now a savior god as well, becomes a creator god and creates the firmament. Take a shellfish and put it upside down, and that's precisely what the horizon looks like. We're underneath either a shellfish or a soup bowl or a cup. And with the rest of the bottom of her, he creates the earth. And then after battle, you have to always clean it up. And so he says to the stars, that's where you should go. And to the sun, that's where you should go. And to the moon, that's where you should go. And that sounds like Genesis 1. So that means then creation really is the result of a cosmic battle. Now, that might not be our theology, but it certainly was the theology of ancient Israel, or at least they knew those stories. So when they tell the story of creation, they're thinking of cosmic. When they hear a story about a flood, which could very well have been an historical account in ancient newspaper, they know what floods are like. But when they hear that story, immediately they think of the cosmic battle, the battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And the forces of evil are frequently interpreted or symbolized as unruly water. And the only one who can have charge over or conquer unruly water is the great creation God. Think of how many stories in both testaments we have where water is unruly and God calms the water down. That's always a story with creation motif. We've got the story of Jesus walking on the sea, unruly water. If all that is a story about Jesus having power over nature, the water did not have to be unruly. It could just be water. He could have been walking on the air if that's the point of the story. But the point of the story is to show that this man can do what only the Creator God can do. And so often after Jesus has control over unruly water, somebody will call him Messiah or Son of God. Now, whether they did historically is not the point. Certainly in the story that was handed down, for the sake of those who forgot what unruly water meant. So unruly water goes all the way through the scriptures until we get to Revelation chapter 21, which is, and they all lived happily ever after. That's what Revelation is, at least the end of Revelation. But in chapter 21, and then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The old heaven and the old earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. Now, what does that mean? Transformation, of course. Transfiguration, resurrection, not resuscitation, not replacement of the heaven and earth, a new heaven, special Greek word, new heaven and new earth, and the sea, the threat of cosmic destruction is no more. Now take that knowledge and bring it down here. God conquers. God's the flood. God is in charge of the flood. Now one would say, well, God brought it. Yes, that's how the story is told. But that means that God is in charge of, has control over unruly waters, death-dealing waters. There's a cosmic dimension to this story, not just poetic, a cosmic dimension. The question is, what happens every single time that there is some kind of destruction? Is it always punishment for sin? In this story, it is. But we've got to be so careful that we not think natural disaster. We're talking about unruly water here. It can be any kind of natural disaster. When there is a natural disaster, inevitably, somebody will ask, or many will ask, what did we do to deserve this? Inevitably, when things don't go right, we interpret that as punishment from God. Is that really the case? Is that the kind of God we have? Or might it be, again, I remember 9/11. I was teaching at the time on that day, and we had a theological reflection, and it was a doctor of ministry program. And so what we did, it happened about 9:00. The 9/11 tragedy happened just before 9:00, and that's when the class was supposed to happen. And they were all together, and so instead of having class, we went to a television set and we sat there. 25 adult people sat in a room for an hour, and you could have heard a pin drop, just watching the terror. And then when bodies begin to move, then you knew it was time to move. And so we went back to class and we had theological reflection on the tragedy of 9/11. And I remember one student was Nigerian, a Nigerian student. And he said this, he says, I think what happened is a terrible thing. But then he said this, but you Americans think this should never happen to you. We in Nigeria face terrorism every day. Now, he didn't say you deserved it. He didn't say it doesn't matter. He put it in an entirely different context. And then another student was a Capuchin who had been equivalent to the provincial in the Central American. He was in Salvador. And he said, it reminds me of something that happened in Salvador when I was there. There was terrible mudslides as a result of rain and flooding. And 20,000 people were either killed or injured. And he said, and there was a small notice of this on the front page of the newspaper. And the next day, it was on the second page. And the third day, it was not even in the newspaper. And again, he never said it was, 9/11 was not important. But what he said was, and I never forgot those words, it's almost as if some lives are more important than others. Now, we all could tell stories about tragedy where human beings are victims of natural disaster. The question is, to what extent is God responsible for that? Now, on the one hand, of course, God in a certain way is responsible for everything because nothing would happen to anything if the thing was not a creature of God. But issues like that always leave us without answers, satisfying answers, and only question marks. Why did this happen? I think that is a better question than why did God do this to me? As if God is sitting there waiting. Okay, this is what she owes me, and then writes the name right off. I'm sure our concept of God is not like that. And yet sometimes we act as if it is. Now the question, as I say, why do things like that happen? The famous book, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? Written by a good Jewish writer who in his tradition, post-Holocaust, I never knew this from him, but I know this from my Jewish friends that I have had in my lifetime. The Holocaust really threw the Jewish community, the believing Jewish community, not just the ethnic Jews, in great turmoil. Because why? Most of the Jews that were killed in the Holocaust were Eastern European. And that's where the piety was. The Hasidic piety, the seed of Hasidic piety was Eastern European. And most of them were Eastern European people. Presumably, the Jews would say, some of the most pious people, the ones least expected to be suffered or punished by God, or that God would allow to suffer as they suffered. So how do they deal with it? Those people, the heart of their religion is that we are God's chosen people who have been brought out of slavery. Is this the way God takes care of God's chosen people? And my friend said, as a consequence of that, many Jews stopped worshiping. Many Jews stopped believing in God, stopped practicing their faith. Who needs a God who does that? And other Jews reinterpreted the theology and turned not to the exile, which was the story of Moses, but to the Exodus much later, hundreds of years later, which again was the story of great suffering, but of rebuilding. But the question is still, why were they taken into exile in the first place? Why did the people suffer from the Holocaust in the first place? Why did Nashville have to get flooded like that in the first place? And even though in a certain sense, the story has something of a happy ending, they have a chance to start over again. Why was there a flood in the first place? Why does God not do it? I don't believe God does it. I think things happen, and we struggle to understand why. Because we know we're not responsible. Sometimes we know we are, but I'm talking about the times when we know we're not responsible. I did nothing. I did the best I could. I can't believe that God would do this. We struggle with that. We don't have an answer for that. And we want desperately to have an answer and not give up on God. And the answer to that question is found in the book of Job, believe it or not. And the answer is, I'm not telling you. That's the answer. Now, I'm making light of it. But in the book of Job, and I'm going to talk about Job a little bit later, but in the book of Job, Job never knows why he suffers. Never. And Job's suffering was not so much that he lost everything. He didn't know why. He didn't know why. And God never told him. And when God finally spoke to him, he said, "Where were you when I created the universe?" What has that got to do with anything that Job said? So this is where the rubber hits the road. Our religious tradition, our faith, our spirituality does not have all the answers. But one, which in a certain sense I will put into a question. Is it possible to trust a God like that? I think that is a profound question. Is it possible to trust a God like that? And it's not until we get the answer. I think when a lot of people, or many times when we talk about trust, what we're trusting is that we trust that God will finish our agenda when we can't. Well, what if God just walks past our agenda? I went into the whole concept or the theology of the cosmic struggle, which is in a certain sense behind this, because at the heart of the cosmic struggle is the insistence every time you've got unruly water, God steps in and takes charge. The individuals in the story may suffer somehow, but God is in charge. There is no question. God is in charge. Which means that's an answer to the question. God is in charge. Just don't ask the next question. Well, if God is in charge, then how come God is not taking care of me? Because the answer might be, who says God is not taking care of you? For sure, maybe not the way we want God to take care of us. But in those times when it is beyond our comprehension, that's really when trust becomes what it's supposed to be. Trust that God is in charge. And notice, of everything, of the cosmos. And, I use the people in Nashville because it's so present and a wonderful example. But look into your own lives. We're all old enough to have had at least one tragedy in our life. And no one but you is in the position, I don't think, no one but you is in the position to decide what in your life has been a tragedy. It may not have been a tragedy in somebody else's life, but it may have been a tragedy in yours. Expected to act in a certain way. Having suffered a loss, whatever. We've all had them. Well, it looks like you've survived because you're here. And even in, I think, and I'm in this, listen, I'm no different than anyone else. Even in those kinds of situations, where we think, I cannot go on, or this can't happen, I don't know what to do. It's going to destroy everything I've worked for, or however you want to formulate your words in dealing with it. I can't give too many because those are the words I would use. And then I'd be telling you what my tragedy was, which is not the point here. But however you understand and deal with it, in your mind and in your heart, it has not destroyed you. And why not? Once again, only you know where your weakness is. So it can't have been, that's why you were not destroyed. Why have we been able to survive? Is it not because God is in charge? Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll take care of you. The problem is sometimes we don't recognize that. So I think it is appropriate to use cosmic language, even though we're not talking about cosmic living. Because for every one of us, in the depths of our soul or our spirit, where we really encounter our God and the realities of our lives, as important as externals are, there's something deep within us where we struggle with these things. And they are resolved. I hesitate saying that we resolve them because sometimes we don't, but at least they are resolved. It feels like a cosmic struggle. It feels like we are overwhelmed. But just as this story and every other story of cosmic battle, our tradition says, don't worry. God is in charge. That is not an invitation to sit back. It is an invitation. It is a call to trust. Believing and trusting that in the end, whatever that end is, whether we think about it the end of the struggle, the end of our individual life, or the end of everything, as Revelation says, a new heaven and a new earth, a transformed heaven and a transformed earth, and cosmic struggle, the struggle between good and evil, light and darkness, chaos and order, is no more. The sea is no more. So what we have in this story, a notion again of the interconnectedness, because of all creation is going through this. The covenant that God made, that's part of what I'm talking about. God entered into covenant with us as creatures. Another covenant through baptism, another covenant, we have an awful large file of covenants, with the formulas. But the fundamental covenant that we're talking about here is creation. That's what these texts are talking about. God entered into covenant with the natural world. That's us, as well as everything else. Entered into covenant and made a promise. And the promise is, never again will all of the world be destroyed. Never again will we be so threatened or maybe even feel the effects of the cosmic battle. Never again. Now the question is, do you believe that, and do you trust God? That whatever the struggle is, as cosmic as it might be, we will not be destroyed. We will be held. Because God made a covenant promise.